empowering you to build better lives. That's what we do. Okay, so welcome to this edition of the Empower Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the art and science of empowerment or improving people's lives. I am so excited to have the co-founder of New Skin Enterprises, Steve Lund. I wish I could say Dr. Steve Lund, but you haven't gotten your doctorate yet.
I wish you would. You could too.
Wouldn't that be good?
Let me work on that, and I'll be back.
That's it. So this is Steve. This is a great opportunity. I've looked up to you for 29 years since joining the company. You've always been someone who I've felt was an older brother, because you're not quite old enough to be my father, but somebody who just emulates this principle of empowerment in everything you do. And before we embarrass you with all of your credentials, because you will never say them, but I want everyone to understand your background a bit. So you are in addition to being the co-founder of this company 40 years ago, 1984, you are also I'll go through them here, and I'll get them wrong, but you are executive chairman of our public company, New Skin Enterprises.
That's true.
You are the chairman of our Force for Good charitable organization.
That's true too.
You are also the primary children's hospital primary fundraiser for.
That's probably not true.
Okay, but
I am on the committee, the fundraising committee that raised hundreds of millions of dollars to build a children's hospital.
Hundreds of millions of dollars
for
this. So you do that.
Yeah.
You also have been on the state school board of trustees.
On the Board of Regents.
Board of Regents, which is different than the trustees.
Yeah, the Board of Regents is the government organization that would oversee all of the
entire state.
The system, all of the state colleges and universities in the state. So, that was an adventure.
And if that's not enough, you're also a leader of the Young Men's Organization of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is 20 million members-ish strong, and I don't know how many millions fall into the Young Men's Youth Organization. So you do that as a side hustle.
Exactly.
That's your gig.
Exactly.
And so, Steve, I guess we start out by saying you've dedicated effectively your whole life to this cause of empowerment. But we want to kind of get into this to say, were you always this way? like as a kid, what were you involved in, and what did you like to do?
Pretty unempowered. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, as growing up, I grew up in Northern California, Santa Rosa, California.
Yeah.
Came from a family of 8 kids, and so finances were always a problem. You never knew.
Little tight.
The most stressful part of every day was going out to get in the car and wondering whether it was going to actually start, because we were doing the best we could. My mom
and Dad. The $3 in the gas tank. Family of 8 as well. Kids. 8 kids.
Yeah. I lived in the $1 thing.
Okay.
Where you
fill it up.
You put in enough gas to get to school and back if you could. So yeah, but and so the idea of being independent and empowered and strong was more of a dream than a reality at that time. I mean, we got along fine, but I was sort of in the back seat most of the time. When I was a sophomore in high school, I was a wrestler in my high school.
Okay.
And I was a reasonably good wrestler, but I was 4'11.5" tall and weighed 85 pounds. And
not quite WWE status.
They did call me Mad Mountain Steve.
Okay.
That was not a compliment.
But a wrestler.
Yeah.
But, which has quite a bit of grit and maybe connects to military service, because you did decide to go into the military, right?
Yeah. After I got out of high school, I did a year of college and then served a mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as we often do. You served in Korea. I served in Holland.
Yeah.
For a couple of years.
By the flowers, right?
By the flowers, and the flowers were polite, but didn't listen all that much.
So, Steve, as a young man growing up, you said you were a wrestler. Were you generally a shy person? Were you a more outgoing, fun-loving? I know you played guitar. You're still a great guitarist.
I would play guitar mostly in my bedroom.
Okay.
I didn't really get out and play.
Not on stage.
And not very much. We had a little group we put together back in time. I think we had one gig.
Okay.
And then we knew better than to try that again.
Most of it, right?
But I think I'm kind of the guy sitting in the corner in the back row. I was throughout those years at least. I've been that's been kind of beaten out of me in the new skin world. They've trained me to look people in the eye and do stuff, and so going on serving as a missionary, and going into strange people's homes and talking to them about important things and have them actually take you seriously, changed that a lot. Where I discovered that if you're talking about important things and things that matter to you and to other people, that people listen differently, and that you really can learn and grow from those conversations, and that other people can actually learn and grow from you if you've got something to say. And so I came home from that experience, I think much more empowered, if that's the word that we're going to use, but feeling like, somewhere inside of me there was the possibility of making a little change. I joined the Army right after that. I was on my way back to college and just had an impression I should go do this thing, and followed that impression and joined the Army. Went through basic combat training and then went to Fort Stewart, Georgia, down in.
And that was just a whim? That was a feeling? When you say you decided to, because most people wouldn't do, after giving 2 years of service in that way, I think a lot of people would come back feeling maybe a little bit behind, and you got to get right after it. But instead you said, let's do another detour. And
I absolutely felt all that. But I did come from a family of 8 kids, and we had 3 or 4 or 5 college-age kids coming through at the same time. And now my dad was a government bureaucrat who was, a brilliant man who did great things, but didn't achieve financial independence, by any means. And so trying to figure out how I was going to finance my education caused me to think this way. There was a GI Bill situation where you could earn something of a grant or a scholarship at the end of your military service. So that was a factor. But there was something more that, I was feeling impressions that this was something I needed, as I continued to develop, that I would get something more out of that than I had. I didn't really know what I was in for. I pretty much hated the experience going in, but as it turns out...
you stayed with it, right?
Well, you're under contract. It was show up for work or go to jail kind of a thing. So I was, I was a reasonably good soldier. I was the soldier of the year of my battalion one year.
And you were based where?
I did Fort Stewart, where I was in a combat engineer battalion, working and living in unair-conditioned circumstances for about a year, out in the middle of 26 miles of swamp every direction. It was a growing experience there, but worked with remarkable people, great folks, many of them from the South. We understand the value of diversity. I was in a really diverse situation, very, very capable people, mixed in with those who were less so, and people from pretty much every nation, kindred, tongue, and people kind of a thing. But I would not trade that experience there really for anything. Doing hard things, kind of pushing.
So this is where I was. This is a segue, so we'll see where it goes. But you just described a pretty difficult upbringing that shaped you fundamentally and foundationally through grit, right? Doing hard things. How do you look at parenting now? Because as a parent myself with kids at about this age of these critical 17 to 24 years, we read Angela Duckworth and the grit and doing hard things. Like, how do you see that now? Because the world's a lot easier in some ways.
Yeah, it turns out we don't come out of the womb understanding what our capacities are. Somehow we have to test our capacities. And so doing things like, I was in a Boy Scout troop as a young man, and my diminutive size for the backpack as big as me, headed off with our scout troop and did 50-mile hikes and swam across lakes and forded rivers and camped out in the snow and had some really miserable experiences of it, and with some happiness mixed in. But along the way, you don't know what's happening at the time, but later on, as you face hard things in life, you say, I felt like this before, and found that I was able to be okay.
Push through.
There will be the sun's going to come up tomorrow, and we'll be able to keep fighting.
What's the expression? It's so hard to say no when you can afford to say yes, and I think as parents, it almost feels that way. It's so much easier. My daughter texted me this morning and said, "Dad, she's starting 2-a-days for volleyball at the Utah State." She's like, "Dad, I want to come home." And I said, "Yeah, I understand. So wake up today." So I got it late last night. I wake up today and do it. Be a robot, go through the motions. But I think that's to your point, it's we're not born that way, but we kind of are. We are born with the capability, but we have to choose that. So how do you see from a parenting perspective or even a self perspective, like how do we need to parent differently now?
Yeah, the problem isn't just the kids, is it? I guess that's what you're saying. Especially if you've grown up, without much.
Yeah.
Blake used to say to me, "I'm having a hard time denying my kids because I grew up being denied."
Yeah.
I got that check mark.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to.
Yeah.
I want to go play.
Yeah.
And I want my kids to come with me. And so with that counter. That disadvantage running against them, it's easy for your kids to grow up not ever having to face really hard problems if you've come to a place where you're a little bit more comfortable than you are. And most of society is in a better place than they were.
That's it.
There's suffering in the world, there's no doubt, and here in this country there's suffering too. But go back to the 1940s and 50s and 60s, My father grew up in the 1930s and joined the Navy as a 17-year-old right at the end of World War II, and he grew something like 11 inches while he was in the Navy because it's the first time his body had seen protein, kind of from growing up in a very, very difficult period of economics that was there. And so I grew up in the shadow of that too, where there's a lot of financial insecurity in our DNA going on like that. And so today, how do you get your kids to have those kinds of experiences? I don't want them to have those kinds of experiences, but I do want them to have to lean in. We kind of decided that the place that we were going to be very push hard on our kids to learn grit and to learn stamina was in school. If you don't want to be on the wrestling team, fine. Although some of my kids did go out and do athletics, did do sports, but what I kept telling myself was they're going to learn this in graduate school.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they'll figure it out. And they're smart kids as well. So we'll go into military. You did the military time.
I spent a couple more years in Europe, in Germany. Being a stranger in a strange land, but in a military intelligence unit there, where I met again another wide swath of really interesting people from a lot of different places and so forth. So
were you Wiesbaden there, or where were you?
Frankfurt, Germany.
You were in Frankfurt?
Right in Frankfurt,
Okay.
Yeah. So I came home as a 24-year-old sophomore after a 6-year summer vacation between my freshman and sophomore years, and really felt like I was behind the curve.
Oh, yeah. So 26.
So, jumped in, 24.
Or 24, sorry.
Jumped into to school, with some real fervor and went year-round and finished an undergraduate degree. And then because of this military funding that was available to me, I had room for graduate school, so I started taking exams to see where I could get into, and got into a good law school and
did the LSAT and
decided to go to law school. I was a communications major as a undergraduate. I thought I'd probably wanted to be a journalist or work in media somewhere, maybe write for TV or I didn't know where that was going to go, but thought if I was going to be a journalist, to differentiate myself, having an MBA or having a law degree would allow me to talk to different kinds of people in a different way, and maybe understand the world a little more clearly, so I'd have more to say about what I was observing. And I got to law school, and like most law schools, by the time I got out, they'd pretty much, at my law school, if you weren't really going to be a man, if you weren't going to go be a litigator.
Yeah, you got to go. Okay.
You've got to be willing to go into the arena and learn to advocate for people. And so by the time I got out, that idea of working in journalism had kind of come and gone, and so I went to work for a litigation firm.
Okay.
And while I was working there, I got approached by one of my college friends, my best friend from my undergraduate years, named Blake Roney, who was about to start a company. And so he talked.
Why not?
He would come into my office. To me, it's a hilarious story because he was looking for a little part-time work that he could do to support. He was married. We were married. We got married a week before we started law school, Colleen and I. And so he came by, and my law firm actually hired him as a process server.
Okay.
So he would come in and pick up stuff that had to be served in person to people, complaints
Door-to-door
and stuff. He would have to go and wait outside of a bar until he saw the guy come out, and he'd run out and say, "You're served," and then run for his life.
Which he has an approachable way about him, right? So that probably was a perfect job for him.
They loved him.
Yeah,
they loved him. He was the best process server in the history of process servers because he's so creative.
Yeah.
And he could figure out where people were going to be, and he would go be there. And I think he actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
But that was providing me enough money to kind of experiment with some businesses.
Okay.
And so he came and talked to me about a couple of business ideas that he and his brother Brooke were working on, and I did a little research on some of them, and they did a lot of research on a lot of them, and none of them panned out. We were a little bit ahead of the game. He came in once. They were going to put those little satellite dishes on houses and build a sales force. Was going to go put. They had those huge satellite dishes, and they were just going.
Yeah, this isn't the day of direct TV. This was the day.
This is before direct TV.
Lunar landing.
Yeah, this is
12.
This is when you had the
big one,
the 15-meter dish in your backyard in order to pick up three
big
stations
business.
that you could get. But now the smaller ones came out with the apparatus went with it. So we thought we could build a business around that, but really it was too early for prime time. Yeah. And so that company never launched.
So he's pitching you on multiple ideas.
Yeah.
At what point?
And brainstorming.
Yeah, brainstorming. At what point did you start to think, what, maybe law or maybe entrepreneurship is the path that I'll bet on? Because typically you go to law school to then practice law, not to go sell lotion.
Truthfully, it was a really hard decision.
I would imagine.
In the meantime, he and Brooke and Nedra and Sandy had been. And Park Roney was in that mix a little bit as he was getting through school and so forth. They kind of got New Skin conceptualized and started, and they came to me and had me do some legal work for them. Working on their agreements and so forth, and registrations and so forth. And then one day he came in and said, "We think you should come and work for us full time, and we'll leave here and go there, and we think we can build something important." And we had quite an interesting conversation as I took him seriously. Blake is such a compelling personality, and he's the kind of guy that I felt like if I was going to build a career with somebody, I'd like him to be somebody just like that.
Yeah.
So if we could figure something out, it'd be crazy not to examine that.
Yeah.
And so it really, that decision that you're talking about really rested in large measure on a personal relationship.
And out of curiosity, how did Colleen respond when you decided one day to give up law school or the legal practice?
Yeah.
I mean, you still did law, of course, but you did it on the corporate side instead of litigation. Was she excited about it? Was she nervous?
Well, Blake and Nancy were her friends too.
Okay.
And so she was.
She was in.
Yeah, she was okay. My mother-in-law wasn't quite sure. Oh, wait a minute. So you're a lawyer, and you're going to become a lotion salesman.
Yeah.
You think that's a good idea? I used to respect you, kind of a thing. I didn't get a lot of pushback from family, but I felt it internally. Yeah. The real problem for me was that the practice of law was a really steep learning curve for me, and litigation. Being involved in that is a very arcane.
Yeah.
society there where the rules are very explicit and they're multitudinous, and to become competent at navigating in that world, it's just required a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of years and years of work. And so then we get to a place where he's saying, you don't have to do that anymore. Let's go sell lotion. I thought, wow, it's like I've learned how to be a surgeon, and now I'm not going to help people with that.
Yeah.
And so I kind of anguished over that for a while, but ultimately decided the law firm I was working at wasn't my career, my future career. I could see that I was going to need to do something different, and so.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I'm sure you used the legal background extensively, because I know even in board meetings, you're constantly going back to those days and that knowledge of that you acquired. When you so moving into kind of this era then of starting the business and going down the path, a lot of times the question comes up, why direct sales? Why did you choose this model? And was it based on kind of a lack of funds, or was the idea more rooted in kind of the human empowerment, or was it just getting the product out there? I mean, what was the logic around direct selling being the vehicle for lotion sales?
Yeah, that maybe comes down to those conversations I was having with Blake in my law office, where I had a beautiful desk and an oak and brass and Persian rug, law office, and he was saying, "Let's go run a place over in a strip mall, and we'll start this business and go." And I said, "Well, so let's talk about that." And he talked about basically three things. He said he talked about a product philosophy. He said that his sister Nedra was a skincare buff, and that she was very interested in quality skincare, and as she read about these things in the popular press, she found that there were ingredients that were coming out of pharmaceutical science and finding their way onto the generally regarded as safe list, the GRAS list, and so therefore they were available to be used with all of their benefits in cosmetics. And so she would go to buy cosmetics that had those ingredients in them, and she might find one of those ingredients in one jar and another one of those ingredients in another, and she would read about preservative systems and fragrances and so forth that were bad for your skin, that would evoke high allergic response rates and so forth, and so you want to avoid those things. But she'd find something that had what she wanted in it, but it has what she doesn't want in it too. And so she started talking to Blake about it'd be cool if we could develop a product that had all of that good stuff, where you don't have to. She was actually blending
her
moisturizers together in order to get hyaluronic acid and NAPCA and whatever it was.
She was the first scientist in the product.
She was the first scientist. Mixing. The legend is that she was mixing the stuff in her bathtub. She was really mixing the stuff in a teaspoon. A little of this and a little of that. And then applying it. But what if we decided to not cut corners and put all of those things in?
The fillers.
All of the good stuff and none of the bad stuff, which became our slogan originally.
Before clean was a thing, right? Before everyone else today talks about it. In 1984, it wasn't there.
No. All the good, none of the bad. And so Blake did some research and found that there really was a niche there that was available, and that the economics probably worked. The cost of goods model would work. And so he went down to the college bookstore and bought this is going back to another era.
No internet.
There was no internet, and long distance phone calls cost money, and he was working for whatever he could earn, passing out.
Serving.
They had an American Express card that they maxed out, I think, along the way, but that was kind of the funds were limited. So he bought a 1-800 directory that would allow you to make long-distance phone calls over an 800 number, which is a free call that many businesses had. So he went to the cosmetics section and started calling manufacturers. And the qualifications for a manufacturer was they had to have a good reputation and make good products, and they had to have an 1-800 number, and they had to be willing to be entrepreneurial enough, I can't say that word, entrepreneurial enough to make a range of products on spec. And so he would get somebody on the phone, and he would tell them what they were trying to do, and he would say, so what we need you to do is, make up a couple hundred bottles of each of these products,
Yeah.
and send them to us, and then we will go sell those products and then pay you for those products and place a replacement order. And he got hung up on a whole
That's a
bunch of
bad
things.
business model, right? for the manufacturer.
It actually would have been a great deal. All of those businesses would have been better had they taken the deal.
Yeah,
And so he finally found somebody down in
willing to do it.
in Texas who said, "Well, I just lost a major client for one reason or another, and most of these ingredients that you're passing to me, I've got some in excess here because of that lost client. So we've got some bottles to put it in, but they've been decorated, silk screened for that other company.
Okay.
But what I could do for you is I'll make a couple of vats of each of these products and send you these containers we didn't use.
Okay.
You'll have to get some fingernail polish remover and rub the old labels off
Okay.
and put a paper label on it that can help you to get printed, and you can see whether there's a market for them.
Yeah.
And so a company was born on that very fragile basis, where we learned to talk about the products as, it's an ugly bottle.
Yeah.
We're not selling you a bottle.
Yeah.
We're selling you skincare. We're selling you the highest quality, most innovative skincare that you can buy.
Yeah.
What's in your purse? Now let's look at let's look at labels here.
Yeah.
And they would compare labels, and at those early meetings here in Provo, Utah, we had people going in and rinsing out their very expensive department store stuff, pouring it out in the sink, rinsing out their bottle, and then taking it, filling that up with samples of this new kind and going out. So the enthusiasm started to really emerge. And
so I came 10 years later where the gold fountain came on the package. So that must have been in the heyday of like the glory days after the 10 years of struggle.
we broke all our rules. We started spending money on packaging too.
You got in there. So I know we need to get you out because you have another meeting after our board meeting that just finished. But thinking about as we move forward, we've got 10 minutes for you. I want to fast forward, which we're going to have to skip a whole bunch of stuff, because where you've spent 40 years in the business, and really what it's become today is so much more than it was, obviously, in the first couple of years, but in 48 markets around the globe, hundreds of thousands of people being impacted economically, millions of people on the product side of being able to consume these products. But I remember when you and Truman were working together around formalizing the mission statement of the company. And at the time, you were the CEO of the company, and I was very junior in the company. But I remember coming into
I remember you. You were 10.
Yeah, I was about 10. No, it was the product. But but I remember going into and you had on the old boardroom, you guys had these words mapped out, and you were going through. And for some reason, I was in there. I think I was in finance with the compensation plan, and you were all playing with a little bit of a word mapping type of thing. And I remember you talking about force for good and empowerment, and you and Truman were going back and forth talking about these principles of force for good, empowerment, global, and that has become our mission statement. And here we are 25 plus years later still using that same mission statement. But those principles of empowerment, of being a force for good, really feel to me like they're much more a reflection of you and maybe the founders' philosophies carried through. But it just seems to be a driving force for you. But can you talk a little bit about the mission of the company and why you were so centered and around those critical words?
Those words really came out of those meetings I was describing in my office with Blake Roney, who said, our company's going to be about product, but that's not enough. We will need to build a business opportunity that's compelling. And so the plan is to build a compensation plan that would reward highly talented people richly enough that we could replace the income of whatever successful thing that they were already doing. Yeah. We're not going to build this company on the backs of people who are barely getting by. We want to go find professionals who can train other people to be professionals. And that means we have to be focused like a laser beam on how to get a reasonable and lucrative return on time invested. And so the compensation plan was part of the deal, how we were going to create a large group of people, a leadership-based business, because leaders will attract other people who want to be leaders. And then the third aspect that he talked about was the culture, that people will do more for a cause than they will do for money. And that matters because sales is hard. Getting yourself,
Yeah.
screwed up to get out and,
Yeah.
and put yourself out there like that. But if there's an underlying cause, that would be important. And so he says, along the way, we're going to find ways to contribute back to society in ways that is so rewarding that it'll be glue that will hold us together. And it'll be a more rewarding thing that we do. That if we've devoted our whole life just to making money, that's a pretty shallow life.
Yeah.
But if we together can do relieve suffering in some way, add to the common good, then we'll have something that is durable.
Yeah.
And so the conversation you're talking about that frankly was one of 1,000 meetings. I don't really remember that one, but was about trying to give voice to that vision of having those three things come together in proper balance.
Yeah.
You can't be an NGO
Yeah.
if you don't have a successful business model.
Yeah.
The business has to come first. We have to be able to make a living. And if we make a living together, then from those resources that we can do for other people. And so that was our view of empowerment, I guess. I don't know that we really used that word in that day, but we were trying to find the capacities in people to come in and
push them.
and be successful themselves, help other people learn to be successful, and then together contribute to great causes.
What I look at, Steve, now is, of course, you're still exec chair, and so you're intimately involved in the business, but you've instantiated a mission statement now, and it is on our wall. It's on the statues. The Force for Good fountain, that it will now live on beyond your direct day-to-day involvement or Blake's day-to-day, but it's still very foundational, and I think capturing it, the work that you guys did, I think, for me, was critical to ensuring that the organization will remain focused on that moving forward. Interestingly enough, as I've watched your life, so you were CEO, and then you passed that to Truman, you became chairman, you were on the board, and then became chairman, and now you have all these other responsibilities in addition to exec chair, which is still just a critical part of your life. But what fuels you, Steve? Because I look at most people when they are at the point of being able to retire. They financially, time spent, they go sit on a beach. And you've done just the opposite. Every time I bump into you or Colleen, you're somewhere in the world. You're on a 9-city tour in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Uzbekistan. Like, you're all over the place doing something. You've chosen the exact opposite of sitting on a beach. What fuels you every morning getting up when you could be sitting on the beach? And why do you keep doing what you're doing?
I think Albert Einstein had it right. He said something like this, that only a life lived for others is a life worth living. And my experience is a little bit different than your observation. Most of the people who've been highly successful that I know in my life have gone and sat on the beach for a week.
Yeah,
and then
maybe so.
And then they're kind of looking around for something to do. When you have large capacity and that goes unutilized, it just kind of bubbles up within you, and you feel like you really ought to be out doing something. And if money stops being your motivator, where you're financially okay, and you can, money's always a motivation. There's never such a thing as enough money, in our modern world. But when that stops being the motivator, then you start looking around at other people, and it's hard not to engage.
Mm-hmm.
So, we get a lot of credit for the good things that Nu Skin has done, and it's mostly undeserved. The great things that Nu Skin has done has been done by our field.
Mm-hmm.
But this is where leadership comes in. Blake's vision has found place now in the lives of hundreds of thousands and millions of people who look at the world a little bit differently because they came here and found satisfaction in doing for other people. So, I'm quite proud of our company because of not only. I'm excited to see what the future holds. We're going to do more in the next 10 years than we've ever done in the last 40. But in the last 40, the work we've done at Stanford University with the EB Foundation, the most difficult, horrific skin condition that affects children and so forth, the gene therapy that they've been able to develop because of the contributions that have come out of our organizations has really relieved enormous suffering and will continue to make a difference in the world. That's something that could go on anybody's tombstone and they'd feel like they had a life worth living, and we did that together. The work we're doing in Malawi, saving lives. We're feeding over 100,000 children every morning in Malawi, orphans in orphanages that sometimes it's the only meal that they get in a day, and they're getting enough from us that they're going to grow up with healthy minds and bodies so they can go off and make a difference. And I have this vision that these children that we're serving in these places are going to grow up to be the solution to the problems that these countries have. That 1 in a billion, 1 in a million, 1 in 10 million intellect that steps up and makes a real difference could very well be coming out of our little schools there. But in any event, the joy that you see in these faces as you go there, seeing healthy lives grow up is just very, very motivating. So, if you love people, then it's easy to get out of bed in the morning and go and work for them.
And stay focused on that. And one of the quotes, and I always misquote either you or Blake, and I'm not sure which one said it, but I've used it interchangeably on stage multiple times.
If it was good, it was Blake.
It could have been Blake. He probably would have said the same thing, but he said, somebody said, while the force for good may be 5% of what we do, it's 95% of who we are. And I just feel that's such a good reflection of the New Skin Enterprise's mission overall and what we really want to accomplish, and that's really cool.
Yeah, that was Blake, and which is sort of a contract violation. I'm supposed to be words; he's supposed to be numbers. That was our deal coming in. He's the finance guy, and so we had that division of labor there, and he came up with the most meaningful thing that maybe either of us have said for a while. But that's so interesting. It's true in this way that it's 90. When we, that's hyperbolic, I guess. That it's 95% of who we are. But it may be 95% of what unites us. 95% of the pride that we as a New Skin culture around the world take in what we do here. Great products, great business opportunity, wonderful community of people. But together we're doing stuff that really matters. And so that binds us.
And sometimes we tend to lose sight of that forest for the trees, and so we need to keep that in mind. But Steve, we could go for hours. You're late to your meeting, but I wanted to say thank you for being here and continue to just.
Well, before you end, you're not allowed to use this segment here without including this.
Okay.
That Ryan, I cannot say enough about how much you personally have done to contribute to all that we're talking about. You continue to be supportive of, as the company's gone through good times and bad times, being a force for good in the world, helping people to keep their focus on more than just the paycheck, more than the fundamentals of the business, but focused on higher, elevated, supernal things is something you're very, very talented at, and I'm so happy to have you be here.
Well, no,
at the helm.
It honestly, Steve, for me, I grew up humble home. 8 children,
I know.
Father who worked hard. But when I came to New Skin and I saw you and I saw Blake and I saw Sandy and I saw a whole Scott Schward and a whole new world that I wasn't exposed to growing up, for me it was the answer to my growing up as well. And I just feel such a responsibility to carry it on, what you're doing. But thanks for continuing to lead us as exec chair. It really matters, but it also impacts everyone you touch. And we were talking earlier with some of our podcast people. Steve, you're everyone's favorite, whether you're a New Skin or you're in your other callings. All of our kids love hearing from you, and they get to hear from you on your broadcast, twice a year, but you just have a way of relating with people. And I know I speak on behalf of New Skin and the entire family to just say thank you for doing that and just being who you are. So thank you.
That's kind of you to say. I love you more. I hold you in higher esteem, but thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us today, and we will catch everyone on our next podcast. Thanks, Steve.
Thanks. You're good at this. You should get a podcast.
Yeah, well, it's this group.
Although I think we might need to save that for the